Hi everyone, my name is Tim and I'm leading a university debate club in Prague. In case you're ever around, you can come join us every single Monday from 18:30. If you want to know more information where we're meeting, just click on the link below at the description of this video. Today, you will see a finals debate from Budapest Open, an international tournament in debating. The motion in front of the House was "This House believes that Viktor Orban has done more harm than good for Hungary." On opening government, we have a team from Vienna. On opening opposition, we have a team from Serbia. On closing government, we have a team from Slovenia. And on closing opposition, we have a team from Prague. Our fellow members, Tomáš and Vrťo, congrats to both of you. At the end of this video, I'm going to state who won the debate. So in case you want to practice adjudication and try and guess the winner of this debate, you can pause the video at the end and make your own call and then compare it to how other panelists saw this debate. Either way, please enjoy this video, please give us a like and subscribe because we're uploading more videos from Budapest Open and other debate tournaments. You can also find videos from Prague Open that was recently held, where I myself debated together with my debate partner. Please enjoy this content and see you soon.
Hungary has been experiencing a steady decline throughout the entirety of the decade. I think it's a decade, sorry, Hungarians, of the ruling of Orban. I think this is because of 6 reasons. This is because of corruption, minority rights being impeded upon, EU relations declining, the economy declining, mass emigration happening and being encouraged, and also the oppression of free press and options for people within the democracy. This also happens and worsens over time because of the individual way that Orban needs to hold power and needs to retain power, actively taking away from the potential prosperity of the Hungarian people. On the first point of economy, I think it's very, very obvious when we go here, or for the people who've been to Budapest Open for the past 3 years, that every single fucking time the worth of the euro in regards to the forint gets fucking high, and I have more spending power every time I come here from some fucking reason. This is because of the printing money in order to offset all of this, and in order to be able to invest into the nation, becoming a natural way for the government, or the default way for the government, in order to offset a lot of the economic problems that this has, increasing the value of, or the loss of value of money for the forint, or borrowing of money, also meaning that at the point that, or also being a means of offsetting all of this economic decline, only being able to be done so often, meaning the more often they do this, the less likely it is that in the future this can be used as a future mechanism in order to improve the economy. Also increasing the doubts that perhaps borrowers have in the first place of giving them these funds and giving them these means of offsetting the debt. This ultimately means that Orban has been digging the hole deeper, so if Orban or anyone after Orban ever wants to make the economy thrive again, or perhaps improve it in any significant way, they will have to put significantly more means or work significantly harder in order to offset all the harm that is done. I also think that there's also just staves off investors. You get absolutely no FDI, you get no national investment, because every single year you feel like the only thing that's going to happen is that every single thing that you invest in only gets weaker. The government puts a lot of money into the economy, and it has to, through the debt, or to offset all of this decline, simply because they want to appear strong, they want to appear powerful, but this is not a consistent way of actually improving anything or making sure that things get done, or in a reasonable, rational way that can sustain long-term growth. No, thank you. Second of all, on EU relations, I think it's very, very obvious to any of us who have read the newspaper in the past 5 years how fucking shit they have been, how often they have gone against EU regulations and EU normen, or whatever the fuck you call them, in order to show strength that we are independent of this actor who means so much for us. This is good perhaps for the individual political strength of Orban, but this is necessarily bad at the point that EU is potentially the individual body who can give them the billions of euros that they need in order to invest into their economy and improve it in the long term. These look like judicial reforms that the EU actively is against, or that goes against the EU policy, where you sign this document that yes, I will follow everything that the EU does to be a member of it, whatever the fuck. I think one part, or what opposition may claim, is that in order to offset this, they have improved relations with China and Russia. And we agree, China and Russia have built individual factories and have put industries within Hungary, but this does not offset the loss of the billions of euros that they could potentially be getting if they simply improved relations. China is also doing this out of a courtesy. Let's note, Hungary is not a very fucking powerful nation. It is not an economically strong nation, and it's not necessarily a geopolitically strong nation, at the point that it has isolated itself from all actors where China perhaps perhaps would have an interest in influencing. I think at the point that this is not a reliable way, or this is not an actor that you can reliably count on to investing in your economy into the long term, this ultimately means that Orban has put Hungary in the position where they are relying on a very, very unstable relationship in the first place. I think, thirdly, on immigration, why immigration is so important for the Hungarian people is because it plays into Orban's whole spiel of we need to keep the population. We need to make sure that individuals in this nation are producing enough children so that we can support our future generations. So blah blah blah. I think this ultimately happens. This ultimately at the point where individuals look around them and see themselves with no economic prosperity in the future, with every single forint that they own being worth less and less as time goes on, meaning that when you are within the EU and you see that the EU can grant you far better opportunities, the natural decision for a lot of these young people is simply to emigrate. Orban has also been cracking down on a lot of educational institutions. One very, very famous example is that the CEU being forced to leave from Hungary to Vienna because Orban was cracking down on what they could necessarily teach there. I think simply the message that this sends to individuals who want to learn and who want to get an education and who want to become specialists and perhaps earn more money is that the future for them is not within Hungary, but rather within nations such as Austria, where you can have this freedom of university and teaching, etc., etc. You ultimately get a massive brain drain that happens within Hungary at the point that you do not give your individual people any kind of prospects or any kind of opportunity in order to thrive in the future. Closing.
What is your alternative with Orban? How does the government look like?
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I think Orban is just a one-party state. You can say, you can have another fucking figurehead, but I think a figurehead is just literally just fucking Orban. If you had another political party as the counterfactual, this would necessarily mean that you would have different systems of enforcing your power and different ways in order to be able to cement that. I think specifically through how Orban rules and the legacy and the imperious way that Orban wants to leave behind, or the imperious way that Orban is upkeeping his legacy, ultimately means that it is specifically this actor who is enforcing all of the harms. Fourthly, on oppression of free press, I mean this is harmful in and of itself because the Hungarian population in and of itself cannot think of ways or any kind of alternatives. They are not exposed to alternative ideas. They are not exposed to different democratic options that they could perhaps vote for, meaning that they are constantly in a cycle of thinking that this individual will protect me while also being not shown the adverse effects of why the decisions that this individual has made has actively led them to be in the place that they are. Fifthly, when EU money has been spent because of the corruption that is inherent within Orban's system or political parties, it means that it's being spent in a very, very bad way. I think a very, very popular example of this is when the EU Culture Fund actively gave billions of dollars towards Hungary in order to build beautiful bridges and parks and things like this. At the end of it, this was only a fucking shitty plank bridge because all of this money went to Orban's cronies in order to make sure that he can at least centralize his power and upkeep his influence. It's you need to keep them satisfied in order to make sure that you can centralize yourself as one authoritarian figure and not just an individual who, has to keep his population happy. Lastly, on minority rights, I think this is just generally horrible. Probably Victor's going to go into it in his speech more, but the misogynistic policies where in order to have any kind of education and to fund this, you need to have free fucking children. Shout out to Esther who told me this in round one. It's absolutely horrible. I think it also means that women do not want to be that. I think it means that LGBTQ individuals do not want to be it. And I think ultimately individuals who see themselves with better prospects in other nations ultimately leave this nation and do not want to invest in this. For all of these reasons, incredibly proud to propose.
I want to start this speech by giving multiple reasons why democracy doesn't matter. Firstly, Hungary is not China. There are still certain freedoms. We are biting the bullet that this is not perfect, but certain freedoms exist of press and all these sorts of things. Secondly, democracy has come down to you circling a certain number once every 5 years. I don't see the principle of democracy working anyway. It's generally a thing that doesn't work. Thirdly, lobby power for corporations and foreign interests and those sorts of things has become just too strong and too powerful. So no matter who's in power, you're doing pretty much the same thing anyway, and your vote doesn't necessarily matter at all. Fourthly, there is in places like Hungary, there's always the culture of populism anyway. This is the comparative opening government is struggling with, right? Given the fact that they've been close to the SSSR for 50 years and those sorts of things, there's corruption, there's all these sorts of things. So some parts of democracy are likely to die on their side of the house as well. And fifthly, most people just don't give a fuck about democracy, guys. They want immediate benefits. They want money and food on the table. It's a liberal lie to claim that people care about about freedom of press and those sorts of things. That being said, let's talk about international relations, right? Opening government says your relationship with EU has now become shit. This is a lie, right? EU can do certain things to kind of nag that you're not a good guy and these sorts of things. There are 4 reasons, however, why they're not likely to take you down, take you, cancel all these sorts of things. 1, because you then be closer to Russia, which is objectively against the interest of the EU, so they want to keep you together and not closer to Russia and these sorts of things. Secondly, you're keeping migrants off their borders. Contrary to the popular belief, Germany also doesn't want migrants in their country and those sorts of things. So the fact that Orban is doing all of these things is great for them, and they want to keep him there. Thirdly, you're a stable leader, right? They want stability for economy, for corporations, all these sorts of things, right? Also, fourthly, EU is not currently that united. So in order to do something terrible against Orban, we'd have to have Poland and France all uniting and agreeing, which is not happening because Poland is great with fucking Orban, right? That is why they can nag a bit, but never do anything terrible to you, and you're always going to be cool with EU, close to EU, and these sorts of things. No. Why is it then good that you have the, this kind of disassociating yourself with the EU to the extent to which Orban is doing this? I think, number 1, migrations, right? I mean, I'm going to run the right-wing argument here, but migrations suck for the country that is taking in loads of migrants, right? That means that, especially in countries like Hungary, where there's not much money for welfare and these sorts of things, you're literally sacrificing your own citizens, your own taxpayers, so you can, so Angela Merkel or that bold successor of her can say good job, and these sorts of things, right? I mean, also technically speaking, criminal activity is on the rise in countries where there's loads of migrants coming and these sorts of things. This is unfortunate reality in these sorts of things. I think you protect your own borders, you protect your own people, and you have more money to spend on your own people and these sorts of things. Opening government says, the value of the forint. I just want to note that this is a global trend. We're living in a crisis. That's why forint is jumping and all these sorts of things. So is lira. So is so many different, currencies. This is not necessarily connected to Hungary or Orban for that matter, right? But I want to talk about migrants a bit more. This is specifically important for countries like Hungary, given that billions or millions of migrants are coming specifically to Hungary because this is the gateway to the Western Europe where they want to end up eventually, right? So you have to have strong policies, and the only person who can do this is fucking Orban, who has this strong man status that he is protecting his country and these sorts of things. Secondly, on Russia, right, and China being closer to them, they agree this is the case. Why is this important? 1, you get cheap gas in times of high gas prices and these sorts of things, so your people can have heating and all these sorts of things. Second, you get much more investment from these countries, right? I mean, maybe they're doing it out of courtesy. I don't care. At least you have factories, you have jobs and all these sorts of things. Thirdly, who knows what the political situation is going to be like in 10 years? Maybe Russia wins all wars. Maybe China becomes stronger and these sorts of things. Why not be closer to them? Come on, guys. I mean, when you have the ability to sit on 2 chairs, my idea is sit on both chairs. No, thank you, right? Right. But also, fourthly, this pushes EU to like you even more, right? Because when you're becoming closer to China and Russia, they're all of a sudden like, oh, no, come to us. Sorry, we were joking, these sorts of things, right? So this is also a mechanism on our side of the house, right? This is also working the same with China and all these sorts of things. Why would you not use this? I mean, so Germany can say, bravo, terrible. Secondly, on stability, right? Why is Orban stable? Couple of reasons. I think he fucked over, opposition to some extent. Opposition is focused on him too much, doesn't have their own policies and these sorts of things. He's able to control everything. Things change slowly. Legislation is passed slowly and these sorts of things. I think we agree that he's generally stable. Why is this important? 1, you get more investment. Investors like stability. They like when things don't change. They like when they can make their projection for the next 10 years and not count on you being crazy and these sorts of things, right? But also, it's the feeling of safety of individuals that live in your country, right? The fact that you know the country is relatively stable, that there's going to be jobs and investments means that every single individual is, happier with their lives. Also on IR, right? I mean, countries like Russia, China like to come to you more because they perceive you as more stable. What is the comparative? Once he leaves, right, you leave a huge power vacuum of unexperienced and terrible opposition people that all kind of fight and these sorts of things, and you don't have any of these benefits, right? I think opposition is disunified and all these sorts of things. That is terrible. No. Thirdly, populism is generally a good thing, right? I think that even though what is this guy saying, right? I mean, the reason why populism is okay is because you get immediate benefits for people. You build roads, you give them jobs, right? I know this is in order to keep yourself in power, but fair fuck, right? You give them something that they can actually materialize instead of, political freedoms that nobody cares about and these sorts of things. But also in the long term, right? You open factories, you give jobs to people. So this is a long-term argument. You may leave office at one point, but at least, you gave people something. So that wouldn't work in the alternative, right? Because you have to pass long-term policies that don't give the immediate effects to people, where the benefits materialize after a long time and these sorts of things. No. I want to talk about the final thing, which is the comparative, right? And this is the major problem for government, right? Who is likely to be the alternative? They are fucking terrible, right? Couple of reasons. One, they're incredibly disunited. There's millions of different parties, right, left, all of these things. There's a necessary power vacuum once he leaves, right? Secondly, they haven't had the time to develop their own policies because they're too much focused on not being Orban, right? And their only policies, we are not Orban, these sorts of things, which is something that people generally don't buy. Thirdly, they're incredibly inexperienced in these sorts of things. They never had the grasp of power. They don't know how these things generally work and function and these sorts of things. But look, guys, I don't even have to prove that the opposition is necessarily worse than Orban. I can only tell you that they're exactly the same as Orban, and with the benefits that we proved, that's more than enough to win this round, right? So why are they likely to be exactly the same? One, corruption is not something Orban came up and invented, right? This is something that is the status quo in these countries for like hundreds of years in the past. There's a culture of corruption. Institutions are heavily corrupted to the core, right? So that is like, the things are likely going to be exactly the same. They also dislike minorities. They also sometimes come from the right wing. Who tells you that you're not even going to have a more right-wing person after Orban leaves, who even fucks over minorities, even more, women, LGBT, and all these sorts of things, right? They're exactly as terrible or worse than Orban, which is to say that opening government has no, counterfactual, comparative. That was the word I was looking for. I mean, Orban is nice. Thanks.
Okay. Hungary should be the heart of Europe. It is right at its center. It is a beautiful country with rich history and culture and lies at the door between East and West. It should be an attractive country for investment, qualified migration, and hubs of science and innovation. Yet because of Orban's selfish and bad leadership specifically, Western investors turn away, your people are leaving, and your neighbors in Europe look down on you. Orban specifically was vital to the turn of the tide on democratization and westernization. Note that Hungary is an EU member. That means at some point you met the standards, Hungary met the standards for individual rights, democracy, economic standards. The status quo is, if you applied for EU membership now, you'd be rejected because your economy is bad, your institutions are corrupt, etc. Opening opposition correctly points out that the current institutions here are, and I quote, corrupted to the core. When you joined, they weren't. So clearly, something has gone wrong in the process, and the variable that we identify is Orban. Now, Georgia tells us, oh, democracy is not important and only silly liberals care about this. Maybe this is true, and maybe it's not a principal thing that I care about. But you do want our silly liberal money, right? And for our silly liberal money, you have to maintain those standards. And yes, you can say, democracy, we don't care about it in particular, but because our silly liberals care, you don't get our money because you don't meet our standards. You point out that the EU can't do much against you because, oh, after all, we don't want you to turn to Russia. Well, maybe rationally, we don't want you to turn to Russia. But the silly liberal population has democratic control over their leaders. And we demand things like democracy, rights for minorities, and all of that. So even if the rational thing was to not have you turn to Russia, we are willing to have some negative economic downsides in order to stand up for our values. We're doing it when sanctioning Russia. We're doing it when not buying their oil. Yes, we're suffering a little, but we have values and we stand up for them. And the Hungarian economy is specifically for the worse, because as a direct result of this association with Russia, as a result of the decline in democratic values. Why? Well, because there are specifically currently billions of euros that the EU want to give to Hungary, but Orban says, no, I'm not willing to follow the rules. I don't want the Western liberal money. I'm okay with my people and population suffering. Why? Because I can feel like a big, strong man with my ideological goal of hating the West. It is then specifically that the harm materializes. And I do want to point out the rules here. We don't have to provide an alternative. We're not regretting Orban. We're saying his, he has done more harm than good. And the harm is specifically you don't access Western money, E1 from the EU directly because you're no longer getting it. Your mechanism of Poland protects you is like outdated by 3 years. There is a new Poland that is turned back to the West and will no longer protect you. You have nobody else. You are isolated. Isolated institutionally from the EU, but also because your Fidesz party left the Conservatives. You have no power in the Commission because you decided to go your own shitty, silly way so that Orban can feel like a cool big man and cozy up to all these other people. His populism has resulted in the economic decline. Yes, the whole world is a little bit in crisis and all our money is decreasing. Yet still I'm getting more forint for my euro. Even though the euro has declined a little bit, the Hungarian forint has declined much, much more. Your purchasing power is weak, our purchasing power is strong. This is a direct result of Orban's leadership and of Orban's policy. It's a specific harm we point to. And that is not just the harm that you can buy less things and therefore be less able to enjoy your life. It is also that the qualified people you have in your country, in Hungary, they go away. They go away because they don't have academic freedom and because the Western investors aren't coming here creating jobs for qualified people. They turn away into other Western countries because you're still in Schengen. Your people can leave and you can't stop them, and they are leaving. Not just the people specifically are leaving. Western companies are leaving. Their jobs are going with them. Qualified jobs specifically go away. And now I want to address migration because you run the classic, Serb, migration sucks and they're all criminals. Hungary still has migration, as everybody else has migration. The difference is the West has what you would call bad migration, but we also have qualified migration because we get your smart people that come to us and work in our smart people jobs, right? All that you have left is then the migration to fill all the shitty jobs that are still left in Hungary. It's the shitty jobs that pay less, that means your GDP grows weaker, it becomes continuously and compoundingly a worse economy for investors, a worse economy for your people. Yes, closing.
Okay, notice the very concrete benefit that Orban brought was preventing the harms that come from any other alternatives that Hungary could have chosen. That's very specific benefit.
I think this is factually untrue. When there is a bad alternative in a democratic system, as there previously was, they can be voted out. Orban has made it factually impossible to be voted out because he disallows the freedom of press in order for people to be able to make up their mind about things. That means they're being lied to, keep voting him in, and then can't access their preferences. This means even when you say democracy is just a silly thing, you do one cross. When you are able to be informed, democracy is more than about one cross every 5 years. It's being engaged in civil society. Civil society is also on decline because your ability to set up NGOs is no longer allowed because no foreign money is allowed to come in to fund it. The very reason why the CEU left Budapest and went to Vienna was because it was no longer allowed for the domestic things to be funded by outside money. You do see how that means less outside money comes into your country and funds nice things in Hungary. That means we don't just win on silly liberal care about democracy. No, we show why silly liberal care about democracy means your economy goes down. And the economy is the most material thing in people's lives. The harm is done specifically that you can no longer pay off your mortgages, that the things that you need and want to have a nice and good life, whether that's the food you want to like, the travel you want to go to, the world you want to see, all of that is becoming less accessible to you. Hungary, at the end of the day, is its population, and the population declines, their ability to live their life in the way that they want and aspire to, their disability also goes down as a result of a weaker currency, as a result of a weaker economy. Your dream job no longer exists in your country. Your dream job only exists in Austria, Germany, hell, at this point even Croatia, because they're doing better than you. How has that happened? You used to rule over them. But now it's gone down. Orban's leadership specifically is the reason, and his political project and his political puppy, we turn away from the West, and the silly West, you might not like them ideologically, but they give you money, they make your economy go up, and you don't have to inflate it with your own currency and debt funding. For all these reasons, fuck Orban.
The OG tells you economy is bad.
Zero analysis. Look at your flow. The only thing that they say is forint is going up. First of all, it is going a little bit, but it's not skyrocketing. But second of all, this is really important. A little bit higher inflation doesn't mean lower purchasing power. This is same happening in Serbia. We have a moderately high inflation, but actually the growth is actually in the past few years greater than the EU average. Why is it so? Because what's happening in both Serbia and Hungary, you have populist politics that's actually having a lot of investment, a lot of road building, a lot of factory building. That's what's actually giving people jobs. That's what's actually giving people purchasing power. That's what's actually in the long term, driving more capital into your country from China, from Russia, but from EU too. They also insert, no EU money in Hungary. Seriously. Okay, maybe there is one case in Orban didn't accept some kind of deal with EU, but I think generally Hungary accepts EU money. It's literally how EU works. Do you really this is completely? No, later. Okay. The second thing they say, people are leaving, smart people are leaving. Again, the only piece of analysis is, they don't like, the populist thing and not freedom of the media. I don't think that, first of all, a lot of the people, especially in Hungary, do not care that much about the freedom of media, but also, even those who care do not mostly leave. Why? It is not that much of a bad, because for the reasons we provide, especially the smarter people have relatively good, relatively good job. Second of all, it's generally hard to go to these countries. Not everyone gets accepted. It's relatively expensive. It's hard to separate from your family, from your friends, and everything. This means that in all likelihood, while there are some people who go to Austria, most of them do not go. This is not a huge problem to the Hungary. And then we get to the point that, the institutions are, corrupted, you do not have free media and everything. First of all, this is a really important thing. We do recognize that Hungary has less freedom of media than Germany, but it's not fucking China. Look at it, you do have opposition media. People have the ability to hear the other side of the story. It's not complete state propaganda that no one can opt out and actually see the other side. I think that actually, saying populist things in people which do believe more, that might not be totally true. But if people believe in them, then it's not such a huge problem than actually people not being able to see it. But what is the alternative? The only proof that they say, he brought it. I do not agree that he brought it. Just look at Hungary's history and all of the Balkans' history. Generally, there were hard times, there were crises, there were wars. All of this led to people who come into power having enormous amount of power and using it to create more secure government with less freedom of media. But also, is some of race to the bottom. Whoever, even if you get a short-term government that's not that much, free media, the other party who is, more skewing the news, more doing bad stuff, actually gets easier into power. So somebody is going to use it. Thirdly, it is just historically true that in all of these areas you didn't have that type of a thing. But what Georgia tells you is the government, the system, the corporations, the agencies, everything is corrupted. That means that all the people from the hierarchy to the top actually rely on corruption to some extent. This is not just money. This is I owe you, I believe you, we are trusting each other. This is how these countries work. They have been worked before the Orban. This means that even without the party on its own, the public institution expect corruption to some level. That individuals who work there expect to actually be controlled by someone, and even if they're not controlled by the government itself, they rely to the other partners. But also, there is no explanation. This is really important thing. The OG is debating this in a vacuum. The debates happens in a comparison. There is zero analysis why the alternatives are better. Notice that there are a couple of reasons why the alternatives are also bad, even on average, not even taking into account that it could be, worse. Why is it so? One, to some extent, people do, accept the corrupt government, and even when the governments are not corrupt, because the other side always says in these areas that they are corrupt. It's kind of not even that much effective to not be corrupt, but you're going to be seen and labeled as corrupt. Anyway,
No. Second of all, you generally have the interest to, get the money from other people, especially in these kind of poor areas. It's not like you get a lot of the campaign money like you get in, a better functioning society, meaning that you need to actually get money from some, questionable people, to run campaigns in order to stay in power, which means that all of the parties are likely to actually get to that point. Yes.
Guys, you don't have a case that this is true. If all other leaders are also corrupt, all of the benefits of stability and corruption and a far-right leader apply, what is unique about Orban? Give me a case, please.
No, here is a very simple case. First of all, they're corrupt to, some level. Second of all, corruption does not mean stability. This is a false premise. You can be corrupt, you can take money, but because there is also some smaller party that also wants to take money, this does not lead to stability. Generally, the situation is that comparatively, you have small parties who have relatively the same ideology, relatively the same idea, the opposition idea, and none of them is able to co-opt, to get to the power and do the same, and do the same thing. But even if you want to get any specific harm, because you have much more far-right things far more leaders in this kind of area, they are, even on a 10% probability they get in a power, it's generally good for us. Okay, so what do you get on our side of house, and what is really important? First of all, general stability and investment. The fact that your government is not going to turn on the China anywhere soon, on the Russia, means that they want to invest there. But second of all, because Orban is so longer into power, he has long-term goals. The opposition party have short-term goals. They don't care if the country will be stable in 5 or 10 years down the line, because they're not even sure they're going to be a power. The Orban knows that he's looking for the long-term, a stable country, meaning he has the incentive to actually, do more investment they're going to pay out in the long run and promote them that way. Okay, at the end of the day, what you actually get here is more economic stability, more money into people's pockets, and better lives. What they get you is some ideas that they don't even prove that most of the people actually care about, especially in these kind of areas. This is not Amsterdam. This is Hungary. Thank you.
Georgia tells me to sit on 2 chairs. I tried it. It's very uncomfortable. There's this bump in the middle. It keeps hitting me in the ass, like Orban did to Hungary by trying to walk a line that he cannot walk because it is not a line. It is a trench down which you fall and you cannot climb up, and there's nobody that can climb up. I will do a couple of clarifications that I think automatically put us over top half. One, what is the alternative? Because I think you do need an alternative, but this equally applies to OG as it does to OO. Because if OO doesn't prove an alternative, then it's unclear to me what is unique about Orban that made him stable and made him a good person. If there's a culture of corruption, other people can also be effective at doing these sort of things. If other people are also bad, then there's also kind of very, very little case from opening government, because it's unclear to me how the benefits materialize in absence of Orban. So there's no harm that he really did, because the net outcome would be the same. What is the likely alternative? One, and I think this is marginally conceded by opening opposition, that there is some fluctuation of government. I think it is likely that other people would not be as effective at maintaining the state apparatus. So even if you are far right or far left, there is a degree of fluctuation. So at least OO has somewhat of a case, but they are self-mitigatory in that probably there is still the same benefits that you get. Like there are far right and anti-immigration people that are probably going to come in. But two, I think there is some leftist testament that exists in Hungary. There are minorities, there are ethnic minorities within the country that remained here from times of Austria-Hungary, etc. There are people that are here that do support these sorts of things. You have liberal cities. The mayor of Budapest, one of the strongest opposition leaders that almost beat Orban in elections, is a viable alternative to Orban in his absence. I think this type of people could come into power. You could get leftist policy. This is important because it unlocks opening government in terms of when these people do come into power, even with the fluctuation for a couple of years. This is better for these type of people, and they're likely to push us to more EU. But one thing, and I think this is very important, this relates to my introduction. What Orban did, probably uniquely or one of the few, is he's a far-right populist in the European Union that is pro-Russia. Because Le Pen isn't pro-Russia, the parties in Germany aren't pro-Russia, far-right in Austria and in Slovenia is not pro-Russia. They are neoliberals and they are pro the European Union. These are the people that are likely to replace Orban if you buy opening opposition's comparative of far-right people coming in. Why is this likely structurally? Hungary did have communism. There is opposition to communism that exists, and there are strong associations of Russia with the Soviet Union and the type of policies they push. There is a lot of opposition to Hungary trying to walk the edge with Russia, and it is only Orban that pushes the kind of hard line between Russia and China and straying away from the European Union. Why then we will win over the other teams? Two parts to our case. One, we actually prove to you that populism and Orban being in power is a bad thing, and like opening government that derives its impacts from just saying that he's a populist and therefore bad. Why is populism bad in terms of the way that Orban does it? Number one, because Orban wanted to stay in power for a long time, he did one thing very simply. Hungary did have a social network of things like public transportation system, public hospitals, etc. The way that Orban got his economic control, that probably wouldn't happen to the same extent, is he sold a lot of these industries for short-term profits to a lot of private entities. Why is this bad? Number one, because this removes a lot of Hungary's ability to have control over its own industries, and this is amplified when you sell to Russia and China, because you're dependent on these type of things. You sold domestic industries of transportation, you sold domestic industries of production. The jobs that you have are entirely dependent on other countries. It's a massive detriment to yourself. It's massively anti-Hungarian. So if they want to care about Hungary and not have immigrants, you're far more likely to be giving over control to Russian and Chinese entities that put out of Hungary, I think the alternatively nationalized industry. But dude, this is really bad in the long run, because the state does, under Orban, still need to subsidize this industry, because you still want a metro system, you still want a healthcare system, but you don't get to get the profits out of these systems as they would if they are government owned. The money goes to Russia, the money goes to China, the money does not go to Hungary. Orban put a lot of GDP out of Hungary by selling these type of industries in order to secure his short-term commitment. I think an alternative populist would probably be a worse one, because this has to exist for our case to exist. So probably he wouldn't do the exact same things, and there's fluctuation of power, so there's less selling of these type of things that Orban uniquely did that is incredibly harmful. Therefore, the change that we get is superior, but additionally, we have more incentives for the far-right populists to actually do stuff. Because Orban isn't really a populist anymore. He doesn't really need to maintain power in the same way as OO says. Orban is very secure. And notice this is a massive tension in OO, because if Orban is secure, but he's also a populist and therefore good, because he needs to bring immediate benefits. The fuck, he doesn't. He's secure. This is your impact that you want to give to me. What then is the second part of our case? We say that Orban tried to walk a line that is impossible to walk between the EU and Russia. Why is this line impossible to walk? One, because there's increasing ideological division. Maybe at the time it was marginally possible, but currently it is physically not. Because Russia doesn't like you because you're in the European Union. They do list you as an enemy state. The European Union doesn't like you because you're colluding with Russia and you're refusing to follow European policy. If at the time it was somewhat sensible, currently it is impossible. Orban did not predict this. It's likely others wouldn't have done this. Why is this so uniquely harmful, and why are the benefits that OO wants to claim out of Russia and China not materializing? One, because you do depend on the EU. OOG just asserts that EU gives you stuff and therefore you need the EU because they're the only ones that give you factories. No, you could probably get Chinese factories and Russian factories, but I think the unique things that the EU gives you is A, cohesion funds that they are currently blocking. Yes, Hungary is in the EU. Yes, you don't get kicked out, but you don't get cohesion funds for your massive agricultural industries that you're losing out on. The millions of Hungarian farmers are losing out on cohesion funds, and these are the type of people that Orban wants to appeal to. These are the individuals that live in the countryside outside of liberal cities that opposition cares about, that Orban screwed over. But two, I think it is because it is incredibly harmful. Just no, thank you. It is incredible. I take closing quickly because time.
Okay, you say Orban screws those people out of their EU funds. If you say still Orban is most popular amongst those people, you have to choose.
No, I don't say. I say he's trying to appeal to them, but he fucks them over. They're the main support base. He still screws them over. You don't need to support Orban because he is a populist and is able to do these things. Also, you can screw people over and they still support you. That's kind of how populism works. A lot of politicians rely on these types of analysis. But two, because you are dependent on both at the same time, and I think this is crucial because even if you think that Russian investment is generally good, or you prefer Russia over US or EU and EU over Russia, why is this still a bad thing? Because going into the future, you kind of cannot keep supporting both, but pull out. Because when you try to pull out of Russian gas now that you haven't secured alternatives, you kind of are fucked because your systems are so integrated that are owned by Russian companies and Russian investors in a lot of instances. You cannot do this with the European Union because you're also fucked because you are reliant on cohesion funds because you don't want to get sued. And fun fact, Hungary is getting sued even though OO is telling you that they're not. They are losing out on a lot of funds. But the important thing isn't here OG case, which is EU funds are good. It is the fact that when you're dependent on both, you are torn apart. And because you cannot pick the dependent dependence on Russia while the simultaneous partial dependence on the EU fucks you over. Because being partially dependent on one isn't a bad thing, but being partially dependent on both fucks your economy into two different directions, and nobody can opt out at any future point. This is why changes would have been better. Because even if there's instability, and even if there's far-right populists that prefer Russia, you don't have the same type of dependence that you can't opt out of. Even if you collude with Russia in some things, you cannot opt out because there's no stability that Orban creates in this interdependence. Clear, CG.
I would like to thank family, debate club, whoever. I'm the first one in this debate. Sure, there has to be somebody in the finals because I'm first time in any international finals. I would also like to last note, I would like to dedicate this to my late grandmother who just died this year and who very much supported me in the debate. Now to the more fun stuff to Orban and Hungary. Okay. May I? Okay. Both governments fail to provide you with a relevant alternative in this debate. Opening government specifically says that they will not provide us with any alternative, then they probably mention one-liner. Closing government never shows to you as to why the alternative is likely. Ergo, what I will do first is show you A, what the alternative is likely to be, B, what the system when Orban was starting was and why this alternative is likely, and then C, why necessarily we care about corruption and we care about the impacts on people which are probably going to be way worse when we employ any other alternatives. Notice that both governments as well as opposition have the burden to show why the alternatives are actually probable. Also notice that the only thing that OO does, especially in Dorje's speech, is like assert that this motion is something that's looking into the future, and they say what happens after Orban leaves, and many of their analysis is reliant on this system already existing. We uniquely show to you as to why if Orban had never existed, if we had a different government from the very beginning, this would have uniquely been bad, right? We tell you therefore that first, what are the roots of the system, right? What is the situation in Hungary before we get Orban? You have a new independence. People want probably the very same cultural policies that they wanted from Orban. How did Orban gain power? He was outsider. He was somebody from vaguely liberal party at the very beginning. I know it's hard to imagine nowadays, but he was vaguely liberal party at that moment. He provided the people with the solutions and with the values that they wanted. However, those values were still the very same values that would probably be in the alternative reality as well. This is anti-capitalist values. This is anti-EU values. This is then something that transformed Hungary from the liberal system and from the pro-EU government into something that it is now. Very much anti-EU and anti-liberal government. We tell you that those pressures from people are most likely to still be here. Ergo, we tell you that the alternative that is likely to be here is not something that's vastly different to Orban in terms of policies, in terms of doing something like very, very different. Even though we agree with OO that vast majority of Hungarian policies are still okay, like that's huge preemption on vast majority of the governments. They just shit on Hungary. Come on, guys! You've been here this entire weekend. You see that it somehow works. People are somehow happy, even though foreign might be declining, even though all this economical shit might be correct. We tell you the policies are not that bad overall. However, we still tell you that most likely those policies are going to be pretty similar. What's likely to be different is the structure of the government that's going to instill. We tell you this structure is just asserted in closing when they say, oh, we get some great liberal leaders who push us towards European Union, who give us the funds, who give us a good separation of money amongst the population. Opening government tells you, oh, that is probably going to be like multi-party system, everything is going to be sunshine and roses. We tell you it is likely to be a system at the best when we take, for example, opening government, where you still might have more parties, but those parties are still struggling for power in a system that is highly likely to still insist corruption. Why corruption exists in Hungary and why it started to exist in Hungary is A, communist history, KGB people and all the other important people having huge influence in society, be that because of their implicit power in the previous regime or be that because of the resources that they have gained during previous regime. We tell you those people then had huge power to lobby politicians, be that Orban or be that the alternative, to actually be to actually do some favors to them. Secondly, however, we tell you past communist regime didn't build any anti-corruption institutions. That was not in their interest. We do not have those institutions here at the point at which Orban comes to power. Those institutions are unlikely to be here even with the alternative. But then lastly, there is also normalization of corruption from the previous Komi regime, so there is unlikely to be any revolts against this. Another small reason is like, no thank you, another small reason is like the huge fucked up privatization that Hungary has had. What we tell you then is, not only do we get corruption, but this corruption is highly likely to be worse when we do not have Orban. And this is a key part of our case, right? Insofar as we prove to you that corruption and structure of the government is likely to be worse on CO, we weigh over both governments who do not provide you an alternative, and even if they do, they just assert it's good. And we weigh over OO because we've shown to you as to why those rules necessarily lead to the system and why this system fucks over the citizens the most, because corruption and internal governance is, in the end, what matters most to the citizens, right? Why is the alternative probably worse? Yes, we buy the characterization that Orban has probably unified political structure in Hungary. Yes, we buy the characterization that his party is probably hegemonistic in Hungary. Why we believe this is okay? Because this one party needs only, let's say, small corruption. That's very bad word usage, but only needs small corruption to sustain few of their cronies to be in power. What we tell you is, especially if we then accept OG's case on like, oh, we got multiple parties who are struggling for power and who want to gain power, those parties are likely built on the very same pro-corruption institutions that have been here from history. And we tell you what is then likely going to happen is those parties need resources, those parties need influence, those parties need money in order to gain power and in order to gain some benefits from it. Ergo, those parties are likely to compete via means of the most exploitation of the state, right? We tell you, yes, Orban did exploit state at the beginning, and yes, Orban still does corruption, but we tell you there is a much lower degree of corruption that Orban needs to do to sustain his government, which is highly unchallenged by any other parties, as opposed to some party which would potentially rule Hungary, but who have very strong competitors who also try and gain resources in order to take them down. Before moving on, opening.
More parties means more controlling each other, more parties that call each other out. Even if you don't believe that, when you join the EU, you have to have anti-corruption institutions. They don't exist, they don't work now. Things were better, things bad now, decline, harm.
Okay, didn't quite get the last line of analysis, but okay. You claim that we should have some anti-corruption institutions in Hungary when we are in the European Union. Okay, I don't see that. If they are here, why are there all those problems that you claim on both governments? But B, we tell you specifically in our first 2 points as to why corruption is still likely to be here, and also your like multi-party sunshine and roses system where everybody is competing for democratic values. Like already Georgia tells, fuck the democracy, fuck the democratic values. Hungarians don't care about that. You have to explain as to why this would be important in the elections. We tell you why then only Orban could do his strong policies. What is unique to him? He is this strong figurehead. We have very little other strong figureheads in Hungary. Ergo, he can enact the policies that OO has already told you, because he has this macho figure in the European Union. He has this big bargaining power because in order, for example, to pass sanctions against Russia, you need approval of all the EU nations. But secondly, and more importantly, he is very charismatic and very good with doing populism. There was no such outsider figure with no ties to previous regime that could enact those policies and that could act like an independent, strong, macho actor that could save Hungary. This is unique to Orban. Orban uniquely unified Hungary, and for those reasons, he has brought more good than harm. Thank you.
Really, thank you. This is also my first international final. Also, big thank you to Ljubljana community who had to leave before this because they were planning on not finaling. And also thank you to David who enrolled into a second university to go to Worlds with me. Cool. CEO says we don't have an alternative. I think David is very clear on the alternative. It is possible to be different things. It is possible to perhaps be a more far-right option. It is possible to be a more far-left option. I would argue that that's a more likely alternative, specifically because Hungary was and still is quite dependent on its farm sector. There's a lot of farmers here, and a lot of that is contingent on EU cohesion funds. A lot of it goes there, because otherwise, I don't know if you know this, but farming not the best industry recently, especially regarding the wars and the ability to connect to other nations. So, like, this is quite contingent. So I do think that the alternative is likely to be EU, but we don't care if it is EU. If you become a bit more pro-Russia, that's even better if, like, they want to run it. Because the question here becomes, you are not on both of the seats, because the problem is that both of the seats are not happy with the other seat being present. Every single time Russia demands that you are going to have a more corrupt version, or that you are not going to sanction it, then you can't do it because you are still dependent on the cohesion funds, because the farmers are going to be angry and your people are going to starve. Or alternatively, the EU demands that you sanction Russia, but then Russia says, oh no, because then we're not going to give you any more gas on cheap prices. The fact fact of the matter is, if an alternative form of government, either from the beginning was very pro-Putin or very pro-EU, like either you would bid sanction Russia at first and then later on become less and less dependent on the economy, or you would do the exact opposite. Problem is, right now you're dependent on both, and whatever you do, you're always going to be fucked. On both sides of the house, you're going to be sanctioned. Currently, there is a lawsuit in place. I don't think that is like that unclear to do. But also, on the idea on social networks and things like that, specifically because of Orban, specifically because he was in a unique position of being able to do populism, specifically because he was able to sell all of those things in the time frame that he was able to, and no other possible person could do it, because this was a person that had unique opportunities to do specific things, alternatives, either small parties or alternative, like more liberal version or whatever. He sold all of those private things. So he contingently became even more dependent on either EU and Russia, right? The acts of the things that beforehand made him more dependent on the international funds. The industries became smaller because there's less public transport now, and is currently dependent on Russia and China. That is our case, and I don't think that CO answered it at all. That being said, let's answer CO. They say that you have like a worse version of Orban, and I don't think that this is true, because they say it is dependent specifically on the idea that there is no anti-corruption structures present, but also that the people of Hungary are unaware of corruption and don't care about corruption. Panel, this is ridiculous. Hungarian people have access to the internet, are part of the EU, are happy to be part of the EU, and generally care about anti-corruption things. Because of this, no matter who is going to be in charge, there's likely to be checks and balances present in a world in which you're not completely dependent on one specific person. No, but also, like, they say that we're completely dependent on the idea of like there being of having a nice alternative. We're not. We're fine with being Belarus, but recognize how Belarus is currently not going through a similar crisis, because they're getting a lot more money from Russia and China. They're getting a lot more investments from their side of the house, and because of this, their entire economy is flourishing. On their side of the house, they don't get that. This we went over CO because of that. Let's compare ourselves to OO, then lastly, OG. OO says that we have, one, the democracy doesn't matter. I disagree. Checks and balances are important. Two, they say that IR, like the EU, cannot hurt us. But here's the thing, right? It can hurt us. It has hurt us. But also, insofar as you're currently stuck in the relationship that you have with the EU, you've facilitated your economy to be stuck in the relationships with the EU. You've made it so that you don't have to put this much money into this. You've become populist in such a way that you are dependent on the funds that you've been receiving. You have done these things knowing that you're going to have some EU funds, perhaps. All of these things result in you being dependent on the EU. But panel, EU isn't that dependent on Hungary, specifically because Hungary is not that strong economically, does not have that big of an army. It's probably not that important in the general Russia-Ukraine crisis. Like, it's as if they're saying that Belarus is going to win their war. It's not. It's not how it works. And because EU is much more willing to do things such as sue and take away cohesion funds and things like that. That I don't think like they prove to you that well. They talk about migrants, something racism, but like here's the thing. I think that actually the opposite is true, especially when it comes to like the idea, oh, this is also a better response than OG has. OG says that Austria gets good migrants, but like I think that's a bit racist. I think that everybody that gets good migrants is good migrants, because like Hungary gets them from a poorer nation, and then like you get also smart people from poorer nations. Those are still good migrants. So if you have good migrants on either side of the house, this is still good. People that migrate generally have the funds to do it. So if Orban mitigates migrants, that flips analysis. Also, their entire case about corruption being good falls and crumbles at the point at which they claim that perhaps there's going to be a worse alternative on our side of the house, because they don't actually prove that small parties are likely to be that much worse. Let's talk about OG. We win against OG on 4 main grounds. One, it is unclear from OG what exactly Orban is, as in what is the contingent on his idea and what couldn't have happened either way, and because of this, they're uncomparative. On our side of the house, we tell you specifically, I'll take you in a second, we talk specifically about how this person has a unique form of power and is uniquely putting themselves into this, whatever.
So your analysis proves that Hungary is quite dependent and under control of the EU. Apart from Russia-bad analysis, why do you prefer the EU slavery over Russia slavery?
I prefer either funds better. I'm fine with Russia slavery. I don't care. The problem is that currently we have both, and every single time we do anything, we make the other mad, so we lose funds. That was the case. Cool. Second reason why we went over OG is because they don't actually respond about the idea of how the European Union can't do much bad. As in, they say European Union is irrational and sanctions and things like that. But we give you unique analysis about how economy functions and things like that. Lastly, they don't explain to you how specifically the type of populism that Orban did is bad. We give you the way that he did populism, right? He had control over so much social welfare and public health care and all of that, and he sold all of that specifically in order to make people happy, specifically in order to maintain the power that he was luckily given at the point at which he was given the elections, and be able to make people short-term happy, but long-term this is going to fuck up the economy, because suddenly every single company that you have is owned by a foreign company. Long-term, Hungarians are going to be losing jobs because those companies are either going to outsource or are not going to function anymore because they're completely dependent on the foreign capital. And also, if Russia loses the war, all of the companies that have been sold to Russia are just going to be gone. This is bad. Cool, CG.
I think what has emerged from the debate is that the vast majority of Hungarian policy under Orban would probably be the exact same, with some exceptions from what we heard from CG. I'll get to that later. First then, why do we think that most of the policy will be almost the exact same? Philip already touches on this and explains this to you clearly, but given that it seems like it wasn't clear enough to CG, I'll try to go through it one more time. The policies that Orban does, given that he is as a populist as both governments already agree, are the ones that the people themselves want to do. This means another, like whichever other politician would have come up in the, instead of Orban in the past, would probably have done the exact same policies simply because they are popular, they are what gets you votes, they are probably to some extent also like what the people who are giving you lobbying money also want. So this probably means that the vast majority of policy would be the exact same. Notice, this also applies to the geopolitical policy, directly rebutting what we heard from CG, right? Now, no, thank you, right? Why does it happen? The issue is a lot of the original struggles that Orban had with the EU were about culture, right? When Orban initially came into power, he was also pretty buddy with the EU. It was only at the point at which the migration crisis came and he had to shift comparatively further right to appease his voter base that as any other politician would have done. It was only at that point when he turned stringently anti-EU, right? This crucially means any other politician following the exact same trajectory would also turn anti-EU. And once you cut ties, once you cut a lot of ties with the EU and with the West in general, because you have to implement a lot of these policies that are culturally conservative, bad for minorities, and so on, you are automatically also pushed towards other geopolitical partners, towards Russia, towards China. So we think, no, thank you, the vast majority of this probably wouldn't change. Given that is the case, why is corruption so important? Why is this the thing that wins us the debate? Firstly, why does corruption happen to a very significant extent? Now, it is true, Miloš has some nice words on this, but I think we do a little more than enough probably to take it over. I think we tell you, first, due to the communist history of Hungary in the past, this means a lot of KGB top guys were able to save some money for themselves via corruption in the past, accumulate huge bucks to then spend on things like lobbying, thereby protecting themselves from all of the corrupt practices they are doing anyway. There is also, given that everybody benefits from the corruption structure previously, during the previous regime, there were no checks in place, and also no cultural checks to make sure that these people actually don't become so corrupt. Also, the horrible privatization that happened later on only added to this because it mostly benefited the people who already had a lot of the money previously. What does all of this mean? It means that corruption probably happens on both sides to a large extent, even if there are multiple parties, because all of them are probably corrupt. All of them benefit from the same structures that were in place before. No, thank you. The difference is crucially in how significant and how large this corruption is, right? We tell you, when there are multiple powerful party networks that are all vying for the resources to spend on their lobbying campaigns, right? To make sure they bribe the correct like election controlling officers so they get more ballots for their own party. It is at this point where you just need a lot of different people need a lot of money to like fight in this political battle in the first place. No, thank you. It is at this point then when given that there are so many of them, all of them have to do their own individual amount of corruption to fuel their own parties, because they know that sure in the long term this might be really bad for them and for Hungary in general, but in the short term it gets them into power in the first place. It allows them to unlock all of the benefits of having the keys to the state and so on and so on. No, thank you. On the comparative, if you have just like one Orban, he has more control over like how much corruption actually happens, right? Because there is a limit to how much corruption benefits him and his cronies, and how much hurts his image in the public eye, right? How much hurts him before the EU corruption bureaucrats and all of these things. This means he has an incentive to limit this to a very significant, a comparatively significant extent compared to if like everybody is actually doing it. Before I get into how this interacts with the debate, OG.
This is not a regrets debate with the counterfactual. Independent of the alternative being the same or corruption being the same or little worse, it doesn't stop Orban from having done more harm than good.
I don't think that's how it works. As far as I understand it, Orban prevented the harm of somebody else coming to power, therefore he still did like more good than harm. I think unfortunately you do still need a comparative. Sorry, David. Sorry, David. No, thank you. All right. Okay, so then, how does this interact with what we hear from CG? I think they tell us, but whatever alternative there is likely to be, is going to be similarly far right, but crucially, probably not as willing to sell stuff towards Russia and do all of these bad things. I think this is relatively unlikely. Firstly, given that Orban has a relatively strong position within his own party and his own government. This means another negotiator would probably be comparably worse, and therefore probably have to do more things like sell even more metro stops to Russia or to China or whatever specific example you ended up using. Secondly, when it comes to corruption checks, which is the only other response we actually get from CG, I think this doesn't actually manifest at the point at which you have multiple parties, all of whom benefit significantly more from corruption, right? The analysis here is Orban can target the anti-corruption committees against specific members of the opposition that he wants to eliminate. On the comparative, if literally everyone does the corruption, this means nobody has any particular target that they can pass off of. Therefore, less of these corruption measures that are needed by the EU actually get put in place. This probably means also that the middle of the road you have to do between EU and between Russia is probably also much worse to a large degree, because if you have multiple parties constantly flip-flopping over who to prefer, we probably walk the line between Russia and EU much worse. For these reasons, I think we win. I'm not sure. Probably.
And the winning team of Budapest Open is, pause the video in case you do not want to know this information before you made a call, is opening opposition Serbia. Congratulations, guys. You're amazing. And so with that being said, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, please subscribe, because, at this channel, we have a lot of other cool videos from debate competitions. So have fun and see you around. Bye.